Hey, it's Elena, and I'm sitting here with my mom, and I'm doing the interview with her for the Where I Fit in the Story project. So I'm going to be asking her a series of questions. The first question is going to be, where did our family come from?
Hi guys. Well, I can be specific about that because I just had my DNA ancestry mapped this spring in addition to Elena's brother, which would directly match hers. I did both of us so my kids could see like where they came from on their dad's side versus my side. So in terms of my ancestry, you can see like really specifically that I am 96% European, 88% coming from the British Isles. It's kind of fun to see on the map. So if you take a look at the map, you can see that strong concentration in the British Isles versus other parts of Europe. Now it's interesting, so Elena's brother's test, which would be like Elena, almost flip-flops that. So there's a strong concentration in Germany and other parts of Central Europe and on into some Slavic regions and then Eastern Europe as well. So it kind of flip-flops the concentration, but definitely European descent.
Awesome. Okay. Before that DNA test, how did you know about our family's origin?
Well, I was fortunate to grow up with grandparents who were very near to me, and they had a good understanding of their lineage and where their families came from. No one was a great avid historian like that kept incredible records, but they did keep some really neat artifacts, different types of pictures, and we can attribute names and dates to those people.
Okay. How many generations can you trace back from your parents?
Well, it's kind of neat. I have some of photos that kind of date back to the earliest photos that there were. So we've got pictures that date back, in Elena's case, 5 generations to her great grandmother. So we have some really neat pictures. This would be my grandmother's side of the family. This is Elena's great grandmother. I did this project once when I was in school, and it's my great grandmother. This woman in the chair, and this is my grandmother, so Elena's great grandmother right here. Letty Mannion was her name. So, but yeah, this is kind of how our family history has been handed down. My grandmother's side of the family, her grandparents. This photo is a tintype photo. It's actually a type of photo that develops right on tin. So that's pretty cool. That was my grandmother's grandfather, Jesse Mannion, and his brother. Then her other side of the family, we can see this is my grandmother's, Mary Alice's my great grandmother Alice Britton, sitting in a hotel parlor, and my great grandfather Clifford Britton, and so this is as you can see kind of how our family history has been preserved. But these are my grandmother's parents. Her parents when they were older, in front of their new Lincoln Continental in 1949. This is my grandmother as a baby with her brother and sister, and her in a little mock wedding in 1923. Her sitting on her mother's lap with her brother and sister. So over here is the other side of the family. So this on my grandfather's side. So this is your great grandmother Atkins, sitting in front of a loom with the dirt floor. This is your great grandmother. So my grandfather's mother, Mamie Atkins, and would have been his father when he was much younger, Joe Atkins. And then my grandfather and all of his siblings. There are 8 of them in the family altogether.
What do you know about them?
Well, it's interesting, with these photos, which was our primary history, always come lots of stories. My grandfather's family was from Tennessee, and they moved to Nebraska, where we're all from. Moved to Nebraska when he was 2 years old. So they were very poor, very much like a moonshine making backwoods mountain living Tennessee family. So like his great grandmother right here, like literally that's her home. This is a dirt floor. This is a loom. But when Mamie and Joe came to Nebraska from Tennessee, my grandfather was 3 years old, and they bought a tiny little farm in Arnold, Nebraska, and Joe didn't care for it much. So they had the 8 children, and he left them when my grandfather was in the 5th grade, and said, take care of your mother, and left him a couple bucks and went on his way. So my grandfather ended up dropping out of school when he was an 8th grader. He's the one who really had the farming acumen to farm and help raise his siblings and help put them through school, and his other brothers went into the service. So that's what I know about that side of the family. And then my grandma and grandpa met in that farming community. And this is a picture of them when they were graduating from high school. And this is a picture on their wedding day in June of 1942. And of course, this is them later. My 2 grandparents, my father, his brother Larry, Sharon, and Sandy. They had 4 children. And then sitting in the couch, and then at their 50-year anniversary party. And they're both deceased, but it's really this grandmother who was the caretaker of these photos and was able to hand them down. So that's really how our family history lives. The same is really true on the other side of the family with my mother's mother. So this is her, Dolores Bestel, with her high school class at graduation in York, Nebraska. This is her mother, so Elena's great-great-grandmother, Nellie Hill, later Bestel, who's holding my mother, Elena's grandmother, as a baby on her lap. This is my grandmother, Dolores Bestel, and grandfather, Shady. Everyone called him Shady. He was kind of a bronc riding professional rodeoer, so Shady seemed to fit better than his name Howard. Shady James at their wedding in December of 1942. So my grandparents were married in the same year, if you remember that. Here's a picture of him bronc riding. And this would have been in the late 30s or the early 40s, according to my grandmother. And there's a little picture of my mother when she was a baby.
All right. Well, this is awesome. Do we have any veterans in our family?
Yes. We have an interesting military history in our family. As you'll recall, I remember telling you that my grandfather had dropped out of school to farm because his brothers were both in the service. And he was actually, rather than enlisting in World War II, he was actually what they call frozen to the farm, which was a military program that ran in accordance with the war, letting very adept farmers remain on the farm to produce food for the country and giving them additional responsibility of farming other people's farms of those that were enlisted. So he was literally working with a team of plow and horses at some points, in addition to a small tractor, planting corn on a lot of acres for himself and other people who were deployed. So that's him right here.
And I saw you had that letter in here.
Yes. So that's an interesting, wartime piece of our family's history. And the other one belongs to my grandpa Shady, who was actually a flight instructor. So again, he was not deployed. He was a little old for deployment. And so he went to flight training school and was a certified flight instructor. And here's a letter of congratulations from someone congratulating him on becoming a flight instructor during the war. And I'll read some parts of it to you because it's really very interesting. But one interesting thing he did, and here's a picture of him in his flight instructor training gear. But one interesting thing about him is that they began toward the end of the war. I don't know if you've all remember that movie, A League of Their Own, where they started to train women to become professional baseball players because they didn't think there'd be any men left, and they really wanted some really wholesome entertainment for the people at home. They started actually training women as well to be combat fighters because they just didn't feel like they may have the numbers left to sustain much longer, only training men to fly. And so he became a flight instructor for women, a flight combat instructor for women in Texas. So let's see. Some parts of this letter that I'll share with you, it's really neat. The first paragraph is just kind of chatty. But let's see. Actually, I'll just, you're to be congratulated on being chosen to become an instructor. I am sure you will make it. It is just possible that you will contact some of our fellows here on Brooks Field. We expect you to have quite a few there who have finished officers training school. Everything is going along very well here. We now have the largest school in this section, 110 trainees, and the last group of 55 completed their flight training in exactly 5 weeks. We have 24 Wacos now and 6 of the new N3N Navy trainers, which are very much like a Waco. We can't tell you yet how they will perform. Our whole ground school force are now flying, and we are having a lot of fun out of it. The ground school instructors join me in wishing you well.
Okay, can you tell me any stories about our family that are like significant to you, or that are, I don't know, commonly told?
Well, that's a lot of the stories that I've just shared with you actually are very commonly told stories. I wonder if I have one thing that's pretty cute is, so, it's that we don't have really concrete facts and dates written down, but it's the stories like the ones I just shared with you. They're commonly passed down. One cute thing is that my sister, when she was probably 7, had to do a family book report at school. And so she went down to my grandmother, Dolores James' house. That's Shady, the flight instructor's wife, my mother's mother. Went down to her house and interviewed Grandma for her family history report. And this is her report, which is super cute, which kind of generates a few more family stories. So Black was the name from England. My 2 great-grandpa was from England. His family was royal, but he left because they disowned him and because he went against the way the servants were treated. And so he came to America and took the name Bestol. And that's one of those cases where it's Bestol. That's one of those cases where there was a name that originated at that moment, and so anyone named Bestol spelled in that way, they say is related. And there are very few. Then he met Paulina Lucinda Evelyn. She was from Irish-Dutch colonies. She came from natural causes, which is adorable. My 2 great-grandpa Hill was normally from Italy, but what was part of what we now call the Mafia. He was deported to Ireland and then later came to America and settled in Virginia. My great-grandmother, Amanda Matilda Miller, was from Virginia. We do have a lot of family still in Virginia, and it was neat that my ancestry report authenticated that in terms of DNA matching. Amanda Matilda Miller was from Virginia, and 2 great-grandma was the daughter of Thomas Ware, where it skips. And my 3 great-grandma was her cousin. My 3 great-grandma her cousin was Jesse and Frank James. So like as in Jesse James the Outlaw. So that's always been a story in our family because her father's sister married Frank and Jesse's dad. My granddad was a mortician and had a funeral homes in York, Nebraska, as well as lumber yards. Let's see, my grandpa was a pilot and flight instructor who flew during World War II, and a professional rodeoer and rancher. So that's one thing that's definitely began with my grandparents is a ranching tradition in our family. So my grandma and grandpa had a farm and ultimately purchased the ranch. My mother's parents were also first generation ranchers, and so that legacy continues.
Okay, and the last question I have for you is, do we have any genealogical records?
I actually have a cousin on my mother's side and then an aunt on my dad's side who have been pretty meticulous about trying to map our family tree and attain genealogical records like birth records and marriage records whenever they can. I haven't been able to sit with them and actually see those records or just gain access to like the online trees, but I'm really happy that the work is being done and that I'll be able to access them one day, and I certainly plan to. And when I do, I'll get a copy for everybody. So I'm glad it'll be more formalized than our silly anecdotal stories, but I'm grateful for what I have.
Thanks, Mom.
Okay, and another great family story actually has to do with the same family, my grandfather's family. So this is my grandfather's father, Joe, and his brother is Chet Atkins' father. So I don't know if you are familiar with Chet Atkins, but he is a very legendary guitar player, and it's kind of attributed to the form of picking that country music has today. So the fun family story about that is when my grandfather, they visited Tennessee pretty often when he was little, and Chet was always obsessed with playing the guitar, and they were very, very poor. And so on a couple occasions, Chet was really beaten by his father because he would pick strands out of the screen door to string his guitar so that he could play. And so anyway, that probably is an example of a very, very old family story that's been handed down because it was kind of wild.